Just a note before we start. Our show talks about touchy subjects that may be difficult for some of our listeners. Take care of yourself. If you feel you need to seek help, see the links at the end of our show notes for resources.
Hey y'all, and welcome to Touchy Subjects Podcast, the podcast that aims to break the silence that tends to come with conversations around domestic and sexual violence. I'm Sean.
And I'm Amanda.
And today we're going to be discussing Seth's story with our special guest, Seth. So thank you for joining us today, Seth.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you all for having me.
Yes, no, it is our pleasure to have you on our show. We always want to make sure that we're making space for survivors to feel like they can come on and share their stories. And so do you want to just introduce yourself a little bit to the audience before we jump in?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Seth Gehle. I was born and raised in Ohio. Grew up there, and I eventually joined the Army, got out of the Army down here in Georgia, met my wife, got married, and now we live in the Atlanta area. I do construction work. I'm an estimator for a commercial construction company down here. My free time, I run ultra marathons. I've got one coming up here in about a week. I got a 100-mile attempt again, and I do jujitsu, ultra marathons. I work out. I'm an avid lifter, I suppose, and take care of the kids. In between all that, and now I'm getting into starting like my professional speaking career. So I've got my first big event next week, speaking at a college, speaking to a bunch of kids about just being resilient in life and overcoming things and understanding that they belong in this world, no matter kind of what they've been through. That's kind of my big message.
Well, awesome. Also, 100 miles is just mind-boggling to me when I struggle to run one. So good for you on that one. And also, as a Michigander, I am glad you were able to get out of Ohio.
I miss it, man. I miss Ohio. I'd go back in a
Oh,
heartbeat.
no, it's the worst state.
I love it.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Seth. And like we said, we wanted to make sure that we were giving you as much space as possible. So please feel free to just kind of jump in and take it where you want to.
Yeah, sure. So, I guess before I get started, I would say that if anybody does listen or whoever does listen, um, if anybody's got any questions for me, they can ask me whatever they want to ask. I'm very forthcoming about my story. So I will say that as a warning, maybe, is that I am just very upfront and I'll be very detailed. But I think it's important to be detailed because these stories, a lot of times, I think are not told as graphically as they should be, just to understand the impact that it has on people. And I just think that for these things to be exposed, people really need to know like what's happening to some kids or to people behind closed doors. So with that, I grew up with a single mother. She had me and my sisters like back to back years, so we're all 1 year apart, and grew up in Ohio, like I said, and up until I was about 9 years old or so, she did a pretty good job raising us. I can remember kind of bouncing around different places, and it just we didn't have a typical childhood. My father was never in my life. He spent most of my life in prison, and so she did the best that she could raising us, and she did a pretty good job from what I can remember. Despite a lot of the things I'll get into, there is definitely some times I remember of having like just having good days as a child, and so I don't want to rain on her parade too much. She did a pretty good job for a little while, but when I was 9 years old, I was going up the stairs in my house, and I looked in the living room, and I noticed that my sisters had started smoking weed with my mom and her friends. And I don't know if my little sister was doing it at the time, but my older sister certainly was. And so she would have been about 10 or 11 when this happened. And, this is like 20 years ago, back when weed was like the bane of existence or whatever. It was really bad and all these different things. So to be smoking weed was bad enough. And then to be a kid, it was even worse, right? So even nowadays, if you're 11 years old smoking weed, that's not good. I don't want to get that twisted. So I noticed that they were smoking weed, and they were always in there smoking. But I noticed my sister started smoking, and I just thought to myself, at 9 or 10 years old, I was like, that'll never be me. I'll never do any drugs. I will never live that kind of lifestyle. And I just knew that I would do something special with my life. And as a matter of fact, I kind of knew I would write a book at some point because I knew that I was going through things in that house that most kids would not experience. I won't get into it too deep, but our house was broken in 3 times and I was there twice and my mom wasn't there, so me and my sisters were there while people broke into our home and we were just kids. So some pretty bad stuff was going on and she started to get very abusive. So she started to get physically abusive, was like close hand punching my sisters in the face, and I was the better kid out of the three of us, so I took less beatings basically for a little while. And then she ended up meeting this guy who basically sold her on a bunch of pipe dreams and got her excited to date him and move in with him. And we ended up going to this house, and um, I lived in a house that had my bedroom had a like a 4 foot by 2 foot or 3 foot hole in the ceiling. So, it's just like this big corner of my ceiling in my bedroom was missing. And I could see straight into the attic above, like literally could see the roof structure above. And so I slept on a thin little mattress and, it was just bad. And a lot of this sets you up for failure in life to be addicted to drugs or an alcoholic or whatever, because I kind of had the trifecta of like being poor, not having a father in my life, and then dealing with like growing up around drugs and violence. So a lot of people who were using crack and cocaine were coming into the home every day, and those three things will really set you up for being sexually abused, like I was. So, yeah, when I was like 10, I met this guy who was hanging out with my best friend. I was over at my best friend's house, and this guy had come to pick him up, and they invited me to go to his house. And this guy's like 30 at the time, and so I didn't really think anything of it. I was just like, yeah, sure, like whatever, let's go. So I go and ask my mom, and my mom's like, look, as long as you're going with your friend, that's fine, not a big deal. And so okay, we go to his house, and he lived like 30 minutes away. And when you walk in, it was pretty cool because I was a big gamer back in the day. So I played video games like nonstop. And when you walk in, there's off to the right, there's like 3 or 4 TVs. And this was like when Xbox 360 was really big and right before the Xbox One came out. And this is how like I remember the timeline of like when things happened, because I remember when the Xbox One came out because this guy got it right away and it was a big deal. So or which I can't remember which one it was. It was the one right after the 360. But anyways, we we go in and he just lived in this big studio apartment. It was this big empty room. It was like a low ceiling, had acoustical tile ceiling, and it was just dark. He had like a little kitchenette, bathroom, and like I said, like 3 or 4 TVs, bunch of game systems, 2 or 3 desktop computers. In the middle of the studio, there was um like a round table for playing Dungeons and Dragons. That was a big thing that we played as well. So we were like all in on this gaming, like role playing, like kind of situation. So in the back left corner, there was this black sheet that kind of cornered off his room. And oh man, excuse me, I have to sneeze. Okay, sorry. In the back left corner, there was a black sheet that hung from the ceiling, and it cornered off that corner, and that's where his bed was. So I just tried to paint that picture in people's minds. I wish I could go back to that place and get inside and take some pictures. But somebody lives there now. I was back there a couple weeks ago, and I was actually going to try and go in there and take some pictures. But anyways, it was just like a dark, dirty, like cave. That's like as best as I can describe it. And as a kid, you really don't care about like trash and all those things because like whatever, you were just a kid and you're just you're gonna play some video games. And it was cool because every time I went up to his house, there was like unlimited pizza, pop, energy drinks, coffee, whatever you wanted. I mean, and he had all the video games, like all the best games that you wanted. You could play them all night long. There was just no rules. You know, you didn't have somebody's like mom or dad like telling you to turn things off or be quiet.
It's
So
like literally the dream of like every 10-year-old boy.
yeah, man, especially if you play video games, dude.
Oh
If you,
yeah.
I mean, you know, dude, it was awesome. I mean, we'd go up there, we'd all get our, we'd box off the TV so you couldn't see each other's screens, and we'd play together. That was a thing back
Oh,
in the day.
I remember doing that all the time.
Yeah, so it was like super cool, man. And this guy, he didn't have a wife or a girlfriend or kids, so like he just had all the money that he was making to spend on playing video games. So that's what we did. And you know, about 3 months into hanging out with him, I was pretty much going up there every weekend I could, which was basically every single weekend. And after about 3 months, I started going by myself. And I don't know if my mom knew that I was going by myself or not. I think I know she did eventually. But anyways, so I was going by myself, and I noticed that my friend, when he would go up there, he would sleep in the guy's bed with him. And my friend's like 4 or 5 years older than me. I was, about 10. He was 14 or 15. And I noticed that my friend would sleep in the bed with him, and I slept on this like little rollout thing, and I didn't think anything of it. I kind of was just like, whatever. You know, it's just like if you have a bunch of buddies sleeping over, like sometimes you share a bed or whatever. So that's kind of how I looked at it. And after a few weeks, keep going up, keep hanging out. Well, one time, I think it was the first time this guy actually was the first time he ever touched me. Um, and the abuse had kind of started was I was sitting. So at some point, it got normal for me to sit on this guy's lap. And the this guy, his name's Armando Vasquez, and he's dead. He died in prison, and I'll get into all that. But um, yeah, so this guy was 6'5", 380 pounds, and he did not look like a sloppy human being. He looked like a very capable guy, like could throw a hard punch is kind of how I put it. And but he was just a massive dude, and so I sat. I for some reason I would end up sitting on his lap, and that was like a normal thing, just like my daughter comes up and gets in my lap today. Like that's just kind of how it happened all of a sudden. And one weekend we were there, and my friend goes and gets some Taco Bell down the street on a Sunday, and we're about to go home, but he goes get some Taco Bell real quick, and I'm sitting on the guy's lap, and his hand's on my hip, and his hand like falls off my hip and kind of brushes my butt, and he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry," and I just said, "Hey, no big deal. It'd be the same thing as if me and you bumped each other in the hallway," and that's kind of how I looked at it. And he said, "I'm sorry." I said, "No big deal," and he goes, "So it's okay if I put my hand here?" And he puts his hand on my butt, and I'm like, "Sure." And right as he does it, I'm kind of like, "Oh my God, like here we go, man." Like I knew it was wrong from the jump. I knew as soon as he grabbed me, I was like, "All right, like oh my gosh." So but you kind of freeze up. Sometimes, I don't know, some kids may react certain different ways, but I froze up and I just let it happen. And so I kind of sat there, and my friend came back. Obviously, he moved his hand. We ate the Taco Bell. We went home. And then from there on, basically every single weekend, it just escalated more and more and more. And I would start to go up there by myself more and more and more. And, it got to the point where he would stick his hand, and, he'd start to reach inside my waistband. And then he would eventually stick his hand inside of my shorts. And, today I can still remember how, like, he had these massive hands. I can still remember how rough his hands felt. Like his hands were dry, they were big, and he had these long fingernails. And so I just remember, like, I know what it feels like for him to reach his hands inside my shorts. And, he started to touch me, and, kind of playing with my butt and things like that. And then, you know, he he eventually starts to try to put his finger inside of me. And I just, I know what all those things feel like today. Like I know what it feels like to have his hand, like, kind of like, trying to just put his finger in my butt basically. And I was like freaking almost 11, maybe. I was probably still 10 at this time. And so I didn't really think anything up, or well, I did. I knew it was wrong, but I was just kind of like, you got to understand, my life at home wasn't much better. So Monday through Friday, I was dealing with a single mother who was using drugs, allowing people with drugs to come through the house, and it was just bad, man. I mean, it was a bad place Monday through Friday. And so Friday night, Saturday night, when this guy would come pick me up and I'd get to play video games and eat pizza, if all I had to do was sit in this guy's lap and make him happy for a little bit, like it wasn't that big of a deal to me. And I had already been through enough shit at this point that I was just like it's not a big deal. Like I'll be okay, whatever. So it starts to escalate to like the kissing and like, just he started telling me he loved me and started getting, like almost like a relationship situation. It's kind of crazy. So he starts to get into all that where he was like depressed and he would kind of guilt me into sitting on his lap and letting him touch me and things like that because I was like his only reason to be alive and all these different things. So he starts to get into all that. And yeah, man, when I was 12, I left my mom's house. And what's crazy about this, that day alone was crazy, but navigating my Monday through Friday life and trying to figure out like how to survive and how to handle school and how to handle bullies and all these different things. I would call this guy every single night. Every night, Monday through Friday, I would call him and we'd talk for 30 minutes to an hour every night. And he would kind of coach me through life. And as jacked up as it is, I mean, if it wasn't for him, I would not have made it out of my mom's house. Like I don't know what would have happened to me. But he was like coaching me and like really giving me good advice, like good things to say and how to handle the situation. So he was really helping me. At the same time, he was ruining a lot of expectations and a lot of things in my life. And when I was 12 years old, I was out in the street and my mom was in a police car. And this is kind of a long story, but I'll just tell you the end of it. It's a story for another day. But she was in the back of this police car and she was arrested just a few seconds prior, and the cops just leave with her. And and I remember being there at 12 years old, like looking at her through the glass of the police car, and I'm like what the hell's going on? And she's telling me like, I'll come back, I'll be back, I'll get you back. And boom, like she's going down the street in a police car. And so I kind of turn around and my dad's not in my life, so me and my sisters are at the house alone, and there's some other people there and there's a bunch of other stuff that's going on. But that was like just what I was going through, man. And so over the next like 4 or 5 months, I was kind of like bouncing around between houses, living with random people, living with friends, trying to find a place to live and just trying to survive. And my grandparents would end up taking me in, I think right after Christmas that year or something like that. And so my grandparents take me in, and when I get to my grandparents' house, I tell them like, "Hey, I want to keep hanging out with my friend." We call it a Mondo. And I tell my grandma, I'm like, "Hey, I want to keep hanging out with Mondo." And she goes, "Well, who's that?" And I'm like, "Well, it's this guy." And she finds out that he's like 30 something at this point. And she's like, "No." Like my grandma and grandpa are both like, "Nope, we're not doing that." And so at this point, I had already defended him to, my mom. I actually lived with my dad for about a month before I moved in with my grandparents. I defended him to my father, to everybody who ever had any kind of like doubt or suspicion, we defended him. And not only that, I was part of this guy's like family almost. So his mom lived a couple blocks away from him, and he also had like 2 or 3 sisters as well, and all 3 of his sisters were married and they had kids. And I would go to their family events, like I'd go to their Christmases, birthday parties, Thanksgivings. And so this guy would show up with this 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old boy, and nobody ever said anything. Nobody ever put their foot down. People might have said things, but nobody ever put their foot down like, this is wrong. And so that's one thing I wish that somebody would have just had. And I know it's hard, but you can't let kids hang out with adults. I mean, there's just nothing good there. Like if they're not molesting them, they're doing something else. I mean, there's just kids need to have kid friends. and that's just it. So, anyways, my grandma's like, "No, you're not going to hang out with him." So I defend him again, and my grandparents just say, "Well, we just need to meet him." So he comes out to meet my grandparents, and I remember the day he shows up at my grandparents' house, and he it's like a going on a first date. The guy gets out of the car, and he's like, he didn't actually have flowers, but it's like bringing the flowers to the door, and just, yes ma'am, yes sir, real polite, making them laugh, warming them up, and boom, like, we're good. And now I'm going back to his house, and I was happy that, like, I could go and hang out with him, but at the same time it was like, man, like, here we go, like, it's just going to keep happening. And so I was 12 years old at this point. When I turned 13, my grandparents had a surprise birthday party for me, and he shows up, and I got off the bus, and everybody was there at my house, and he shows up, and he's there with all my family, and I had a couple friends that lived nearby that were there, and so everybody knew that I was hanging out with this guy, right? Everybody knew he was like my best friend, and still nobody said anything, or nobody said anything to stop it. And so I go on about my life and continue to hang out with him, and it was like every single weekend of my life. Like, um, if there's 52 weekends in the year, I was probably with him 40 to 45 weekends out of the year. And every single weekend there was something. There was either some sort of touching or something. And by the time I was like 12, it had already escalated to like performing oral sex, and reciprocating it, for him to me and then me to him. So it was a pretty normal thing. Mostly him performing it on me. I just was disgusted by it, obviously. And so I didn't like, anytime he touched me, it was like, he wanted the same thing back to him, right? He wanted to be taken care of as well. And he would always guilt me into that, and kind of, he just, he would, he always wanted the actions reciprocated back to him, just like if you were in a relationship. That's just how it is. And so that's kind of how he was being towards me. And he so yeah, so things were getting pretty bad. By the time I was 13, I was going through puberty and all that. He would make comments about that. He'd make comments about, um you're growing, or like hairs in these places. And he would just make comments just in general about my body, and things were changing, obviously. And so, then he gives me my first orgasm when I was like 13. And I remember looking down at this guy, and he looks up at me, and he's happy, like he's excited about this, like, and he's like, "Hey, did you like that?" And at 12 or 13 years old, however old I was, um I was just like, man, like, what the hell is going on with my life? Like, and that was really hard for me to wrap my mind around, because when the body's aroused, it's aroused, and there's not really anything you can do about it. And so that's kind of what happened. And I knew that, and I knew that I wasn't, I knew I wasn't gay. I knew I wasn't attracted to this man, and I knew, like, these different things. But it just happened. And um so that kind of messed me up pretty bad. That's when things really got started to get dark, and I started to get into like the deep water, and just felt like I was just kind of drowning, all the time. So,
Well,
go
I
ahead.
so just kind of like pointing out a little bit too here, it's one of the things that I run into a lot doing trainings that people have the hardest time kind of wrapping their heads around, and you articulated it there, where being aroused is just kind of like something that happens, but doesn't necessarily mean you have some kind of sexual attraction, because those two things aren't necessarily always the same thing, you know? And when it comes to sexual assault, when I'm talking to people, I was like, yeah, well, when these things happen, it's like you may experience an orgasm. You may experience some of these things that are indicative of, like, quote unquote, enjoying it.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean you are. That's your body's response to what is happening. And it's hard for people to, like, kind of like isolate those two things. especially when it comes to around sexual assault, where like, well, if a guy is sexually assaulting another guy, like it doesn't necessarily mean he's gay. He's doing it as a show of power. So isolating those two things can be difficult. So I just wanted to point that out to everybody is like, well, yes, there is a difference here. And yeah.
Yeah, and even, I knew that too. Like I knew that
Mhm.
at that age. I knew when it happened to me, like that's kind of like I've always been a very situationally aware person, and even as a kid, I was very smart. I just was always aware. I knew that what was happening was wrong. It wasn't my fault, and I knew I should say something. I was aware of the situation. I was aware of what was happening. So yeah, man, he continues that train of just kind of escalating force, I guess you could say, and eventually he ends up raping me, and or I don't really know what the word for it is, but he ends up raping me, I'll say. And that night was really really hard because there was this jar of Vaseline that sat next to his bed, and I knew it was there, and it was disgusting. He would always use it for if he wanted to use his fingers on me or whatever. And it was just like this jar of Vaseline that was disgusting. I mean, you could see all the hair that was wrapped up in it. You could see all the grooves from him sticking his finger in there, and it was nasty. And so, I remember the night he raped me for the first time, and I it was like having an out of body experience. I was 12 or 13, and I could see it happening. Like I was like in another world, like kind of watching this kid be taken advantage of, and it wasn't this like brutal, forceful, like just tormenting kind of like rape. It was as gentle as it could be, I guess. And he did what he needed to do, and then when he was finished, I remember him taking a towel and kind of wiping me up, and like a good gentleman that he was. And then I go off to the bathroom, and I'm sitting on the toilet, like I said, at like 12 or 13, kind of getting the rest of his stuff out of me, and I'm sitting here, and I'm just like, at that point I was pretty much like fed up. I was like, my life is over, and I'm ready to die. Like I was just like, I don't care anymore. Like I don't care if I die. And I had suicidal ideations pretty much every day for a couple years at this point, and I thought about it all the time, even at home, Monday through Friday. But at this point, it was like really, really escalated to, um, I was just obsessing about it. Like I was just like, I just need to kill myself. And so yeah, that was pretty tough. So I still never said anything, still never really did anything about it, continued to show up at his house. And, keep in mind, at this point I was living with my grandparents. Eventually, they adopted me when I was 13. And so I wasn't going home to my mom and, the drugs and any of that anymore, but I was in a new place with new kids, and I was getting bullied still as a eighth grader and freshman in high school, still going through the bullying stuff. And so that was pretty tough. So um yeah, man. And he continued to do what he was doing. And then when I was about 50, or no, when I was 15, I was almost 16, I was at his house, and I had a friend that was with me who was younger than me, and my younger friend had gone back in his bed with him. And at this point, he had been making the same comments, the same grooming kind of gestures towards him that he had made towards me. And so I was like, oh, like he's about to do this to my friend as well. And I was about a month away from being 16, and I was sitting out here on the desktop computer. I was playing a video game, and I had gotten into a chat box or whatever with one of my actually with the friend who introduced me to him like years ago. And he didn't hang out with us anymore because he was in college. But I sent him a message. He was playing the game with me, and I sent him a message, and I just said, "Hey, man, can you come over tomorrow? I gotta talk to you." And he said, "Yep, got it." And so, as I sent that message, Mondo comes out of the room, and almost like he had like a sixth sense that I was talking to somebody. Because when my friend went back there, I was like, okay, I got to stop this. Like, I'm not going to let this happen to anybody else. So that's why I had messaged my other friend. And so Mondo comes out and he kind of walks over, and it wouldn't be invading or uncommon to kind of walk over and be like, oh, who you playing with or who you talking to? It wasn't like an invasion of like privacy or nothing like that. It was just, that's very common to say who you playing with. And so I kind of scrolled up in the chat box real quick so that he wouldn't see it. Because I knew that if he saw that I had reached out and said, hey, can you please come over? I need to talk to you. Then I knew he would know something was up. And as a matter of fact, I think that he did see it, because the whole mood in his apartment shifted that at that moment. And I'm kind of like thinking to myself, because it just felt weird, man. And I was just kind of thinking to myself, like, okay, this guy's probably going to kill me. And I thought he was going to murder me that night. And I spent the rest of the night watching the front door, just kind of like thinking to myself, like, okay, if he makes a quick move, or if he gets up and goes and does something that I can't see, or if I feel some kind of way, I need to run. And I don't know how I didn't like get up and just run in the first place, but I truthfully thought he was going to murder me. And so that whole night was really hard. Wake up the next day, we go home, and he drops me off, and he goes to take my other friend home. And my friend who I had messaged shows up to my house maybe an hour later or so, and we're walking around the house kind of talking, and my grandparents are hanging out in one of the rooms, and me and my friend go in my bedroom, and I'm walking around, and I say, I'm trying to get the words out. I'm just like, hey man, like I've been wanting to say this for a long time. I've been wanting to talk to you about this for a really long time. I just don't know. I don't know how to say this. And I was kind of pacing back and forth, back and forth. And he goes, Mondo touched you, didn't he? And I look over at him, and I fall apart. I fall on the ground. I start crying. I was laying there flat on my stomach on my floor, and I just felt like I was like paralyzed. Like I felt like I was sinking through the floor. I felt like I was the only person in the world, and I just, man, that was a hard time right there, and I just felt alone and scared and terrified and embarrassed. Um, and so, after maybe 10 or 15 seconds of me just kind of laying there, just falling apart, the next thing he says is, "Well, he did it to me too." And I'm like, "What the hell?" And because I'm like, this guy is like my best friend. He's like the only, like, I guess, father figure in my life. Like he was just, this guy was like my hero. If you had a big brother, or if you had a father that was just there all the time and was your hero, is this tough guy. That's who he was to me. And I looked at him like he was just invincible. Like there was no way that this would have ever happened to him. I mean, I never expected it. And so when he said that, I was just destroyed. And so he goes, he's like, "Hey, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to report him, or do you want to keep it a secret?" He's like, I'll follow your lead." And so I get up and I say, "Man, we got to fucking get this guy." I was like, "Fuck this. He's gonna attack the next kid who is my younger friend." And I told him that. I said, "This happened this weekend, and he's gonna keep going if we don't stop him." So we go out and we tell my grandma, my grandpa, and I was molested as well when I was like 5. I was like 5 or 6, and I was molested by a babysitter. Um, and my grandma knew about that way back in the day, and so for me to come out here and say something again, it just tore her apart. And so she starts crying, and I go over and give her a hug, and I apologize for kind of going through all that again. So we go to the hospital, and we do the rape kit and all that. And what's crazy about this story too is at I wasn't even 16 yet. I was about a month away, and I was molested that weekend, but I knew that I needed to keep my clothes on. I knew I needed to keep my clothes on. I knew to not take a shower on Saturday night and Sunday. I knew that if I was going to get his ass, like I needed to keep all my stuff on for the DNA test. And so I thought about this, Saturday night, and I was just like, man, I gotta, because he had molested me either Friday night. I it was Friday night. And so when I woke up Saturday, I still had everything on me, and then obviously went home Sunday. So when I got to the hospital, I remember the nurses kind of saying like, well, when was the last time it happened? And I said, like yesterday, like last night. And they said, well, do you have your clothes? Like what, and I said, I said, I still have everything on that I wore to his house. And I said, I haven't taken a shower yet. And they were super proud of me. They were just like, oh my gosh, like, good job. Like this may be it for you. Or well, it was definitely it, but it was like, this is a big deal. Like you didn't take a shower, you still have everything on you. So they test me head to toe basically. And I think I remember them coming back in and saying like, hey, we we got some DNA or something like that. And so the police officer, I actually just interviewed this police officer about a week or two ago now. I went up to Ohio and got to meet him for the first time in 13 years, and I got to hear his side of the story basically. So that was pretty cool to see and to hear his side. That's up on YouTube as well. But anyways, the police officer goes up there and arrests him and gets him to admit everything, or well, not everything, but it gets him to admit a few things. And so they arrest him. He goes to court. He pleads guilty for a reduced sentence. He gets a 10-year prison sentence, and that was back in 2011. So he would be out walking today had he not suddenly died in 2019. So apparently he requested parole in 2019, or he was eligible for parole. And so when he did his request, it was denied, and then he died shortly after that. I don't know what happened, and I'm trying to reach out to those court systems and jails and see if they'll give me any more information on the guy. Because I'm writing a book right now, and I want to put a lot of the stuff in my book. So like I have the police report, things like that I'm going to put in my book. And so yeah, it was pretty crazy, man. And I got a call in 2019. I was in Afghanistan, and my wife called me and said like, hey, just so you know, Mondo died. He just died in jail, like maybe a day or two ago. And so yeah, the guy was like, he was eligible for parole, and he was a year or two from getting out of prison, and freaking, I don't know what happened to him, but he died. So justice was served in the long run. I'm glad that he pretty much served the extent of his sentence and then decided to die. Um, so yeah, and then I went on about my life. Like I reported the guy and kind of moved on. I never went through any formal healing process or no therapy. I didn't go see any like crime victim services or nothing like that. I just kind of like, I was just like, okay, well, I don't have any plans this weekend, so I don't know what I'm going to do now. And that was kind of like the extent of the impact that it had on me at that time. I was certainly happy, but I was just like, okay, like I just kept moving, I just kept moving along. And so yeah, that was that. So that ended the almost 6 years of sexual abuse, probably due to my math of, we'll say, 40 weekends that I spent at his house every year. Definitely over 200 times, 200 separate occasions, if you count Friday and Saturday, and then probably closer to 300 to 400 occasions of sexual abuse that I had suffered from or dealt with.
Yeah. Well, one, thank you for being willing to share your story with us and our audience. And I do want to point out too in there, especially once you started talking to your friend about what you had about what you experienced and how he told you, like, oh yeah, no, he did the same thing to me. Seeing him though, instead of taking that moment to say like, this is about me now, because that same thing happened to me. So let me tell you everything. He threw it back in your court. He's like, what do you want to do? Like, even if he doesn't recognize it in that moment, like what he did there was going to be the most beneficial thing for you. So I just want people to know, like, that is the response we want people to have when someone discloses their sexual assault. Because if you say like, hey, do you want to report this guy? What do you want to do? Like, I will keep this a secret if you want me to, but it's up to you what you want to happen here. how empowering that is for survivors and how important it is for them to feel like they have some kind of sense of control there. So,
Yeah, man. Great point, because I actually just talked about this last night, and he didn't, I don't think he realizes what he did there. But as I've kind of learned more about these things, um, you know, his reaction was perfect because, you know, I think this is a lot of people don't want to say anything, right, when something happens, because if I say, "What would you do if somebody raped your sister, or somebody raped your 2-year-old daughter? What would you do?" And a lot of people will say, "Oh, well, I'll find him and murder him. I'll kill him." And so, had that happened to me at 15 years old, right? If I said, "Hey, grandpa, this guy has been molesting me for the last 6 years." My grandpa flies off the handle, drives up to the town and shoots him with a shotgun, kills him. Well, now my grandpa's on the news for murder. He's going to prison. So not only did I just expose the worst thing that's ever happened to me, but now my grandpa's gone for murder. Now I'm in the local news because, this man with the same last name as me murders pedophile for raping his grandson for the last 5 years. Now it's like national headlines possibly, right? And so now I have to figure out these emotions at 15 years old with the media at my front door, interviewing me, the kids at school bullying me, and I would have killed myself, man. Like I would not have survived that. I know I wouldn't have. I was not ready for that. And so just like you said, the fact that he said, "Hey, what do you want to do? Report him, or do you want to keep it a secret?" And there are ways to report and talk about it without it being in public, and things like that too. So, um, it's just what you said is right, and that the response was perfect. It wasn't He didn't fly off the handle. He didn't get emotional, and I don't know like that he knows this. I'm going to talk to him probably next week or the week after, and I'm going to get his side of the story because I've never really talked to him about it. So I'm finally going to get a little bit more details revealed, but that'll be an interesting conversation because I'll tell him like, "Look, man, I don't know if you realize this, but that was a perfect response."
yeah, no, make sure you tell him this random person that you also don't know at all says you had a really good response and thanks them for that.
Yeah,
Um, but also like even speaking of that too, speaking of the like your grandpa like going off the handle and killing the guy if that was his response to it, also what does that do to you in that moment? Because like up to this point, this person who has been molesting you for years is it's still your best friend. Like that's still the person that you still had a relationship with, whether it's a good or bad. Like you still believe this person was your friend though. Like how hard would that be for a 15-year-old? It's hard for anybody. How hard would it be for a 15-year-old to navigate? Well, my grandpa just killed my best friend or the person I consider to be my best friend. Like there's already confusing emotions there based on being sexually assaulted by them. So
yeah,
that would be just so much more.
yeah, yeah. I don't, it's hard to say, man. It's hard to say like what would have happened. Like I said, it's hard to say. I don't know what I would have been feeling, and I'm glad for. One thing I'm glad about is that I was able to report him. I know that a lot of victims don't get that closure, and that they don't get to close that loop and kind of get that justice. Um, so I am glad that I was able to do that, and I don't consider myself a hero or that I'm special or did anything crazy by any means, but I don't know what it's like to know that that person's still out there. I do know of somebody who has raped young kids and is out there, and he's married and he has kids of his own. I do know of a person out there right now, and I know the victims. But it is not my responsibility to go out there and handle that for them. And I've told them I've talked to them about this, and um, whenever they're ready for it, I've given them the information that they need. And they're still in Ohio. They're still within the statute of limitations, I believe. I'm not 100% sure, but at a minimum, they can seek the counseling or whatever that they need out of it. But that's just an example, and I didn't know that. Like I didn't know about that response being perfect, right? But as I kind of have reached out to other resources, I had somebody tell me like, the best thing to do, and even this cop. What's crazy about this cop? When I went and met him, This was his first sexual assault, sexual abuse case he had ever handled, and he was a cop for 12 years at this point, and he served for like over 20. And I was the first one he had ever handled, and only the second in his career. And he tells me in this interview, it's on YouTube, and he goes, well, here we go. Like, I'm about to go up here and try to freaking fix this thing. And he freaking crushes it, knocks it out the park. They're extremely professional. No, not a single person knew about what happened to me. And so when I came out about my story just a few weeks ago, everybody's like, holy shit. Like, the people who know me now and the people who know me then, because I was a perfect student. I was a straight A student. I was the class clown. I was funny. I was happy at school. At all, you just would not expect that out of that kid. And then even now, like I said, I run ultra marathons. I compete in jiu-jitsu, fighting other men on a mat. I was in the Army. I'm a combat veteran. I was in the 82nd Airborne, jumping out of planes, running and gunning. And I've done all these like manly things per se. And so when people find out about me now, they're like, what the hell? Like what, like we had no idea. Like, how did you freaking, and so when people have kind of dove into my story a little bit, it's a miracle that I'm here. It's a miracle that, I was never addicted to drugs or alcohol or anything like that. And the recovery process really for me has just started. I never really addressed it in a healing way until recently. And I've kind of done that in a few ways, which is storytelling. I have found by listening to other people's stories and how they handled everything has helped me understand my own feelings about things. So I started story. That's what I'm doing now. I'm trying to tell my story so that other people can know they're not alone. On top of that, writing my book has been very therapeutic. But then just doing hard things, just physically hard things. So working out, running ultra marathons, like I said, doing jiu-jitsu, those things have helped me because I think that if you're in a good physical state, it helps you combat the mental things. I'm reminded daily of how strong I am for surviving things, but also because I can wake up and go run and go work out and do these things that most people don't want to do. And it's, so that's how I combat a lot of this. That's been my healing journey personally. Um, yeah. So, and then
I'm just over here like, well, I guess I should probably go to the gym now. Like,
hey, it's good for you. It's good
hey,
physical exercise or physical whatever. It's good for you. It's nobody wants to do it. It sucks. It
yeah.
hurts, but it's good for you.
Oh, my depression also feels better when I go to the gym, and I know that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
why do that when I can sit at home and play video games?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I'll say one more thing real quick too.
Yeah.
Uh Yeah, so when I won this, so when I got out of the Army, I was in this construction company, they're the third largest builder in America, so really really big company. And this is kind of part of my message now to people who have dealt with any problems in life, whether they had an alcoholic father or no parents or abused or sexually abused, raped, whatever. If you went through something hard in life, a lot of times, and I did it too, I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. I felt like I was alone and I just didn't need to be alive, and I didn't belong. My story didn't matter. So when I got out of the Army, I worked for this construction company, big company, and I told them that I'd be the best one. I'd be the construction manager of the year. I told them that when I was at the company for about a month. And later on that year, I would end up winning the construction manager of the year. And that whole entire year, I was there every single week, every single Friday, a dashboard would come out and it would tell you who was number one. And I was number one every single week. So that was the first time in my life at 24, 25 years old that I had seen my name at the top of a list and that other people would look at and see like, holy shit, like this guy's winning. And they probably didn't look at it like that, but I did. And going back on it now, if they would have known who I was and where I came from to get here, they'd probably be like, holy shit, like this guy's winning. And so that's kind of how I felt that whole year. Like, and at the end of the year, I knew I was going to win because I had the best numbers, and sure as hell I won. So following that, a few months later, I go out to Las Vegas for an award. I got an award from the National Association of Home Builders. and I go out there and I actually got their highest honor award, which is the chairman's award. And I go out to accept my award, and I get up on the stage, and I've got pictures of it, and I'm like speaking to this crowd of like people that are freaking millionaires and big organizations, and Home Depot's there, and like I'm talking to these people, and I'm thanking them for this award. And I told them in my speech, I said, you know, this award means more to me than it does to anybody else you've ever given it to, because you guys don't understand kind of what I've gone through to get here. And I have more in my life now than I would have ever imagined. And at 12 years old or 13 years old, you could not go back and tell that kid anything. You know, there's nothing you could have told me that made me want to keep pushing through life. And so that's my message now, is that if you are listening to this and you've been through some shit or you're going through something, just know that you do belong and there is a place for you in this world. Now, with that being said, it is not going to be easy, especially if you've done the things that I've done, you've gone through what I've gone through. It's not going to be easy. It is going to be hard, but on the other side of hard is greatness. On the other side of like waking up early, staying at work late, doing the thing every day, just grinding it out. On the other side of that is greatness. And if you think that you don't belong because of your past, you're wrong. People truthfully don't really care. As long as you show up every day with a positive attitude and you're willing to work hard, you can do anything you want in this world. And I say that because I can walk into a prison today and I'll be fine. Like I could walk into a prison and talk to anybody in there and I'm fine, because I know I can relate. I know what it's like to live a life that is unfortunate. But if I walk into a corporate office, like I just got home from work and I wear a button down to work and everybody's at work, you know, all dressed up nice and doing their thing. And they've probably never spilt their coffee before. You know, that's just how easy their life has been. And so for me, I don't feel like I belong at work sometimes, you know, where I'm kind of like I'm the outcast here. And it's very hard to go through life experiencing those things and seeing people so happy, you know, so happy every single day. It's like, what the hell are you happy for? And so that's when you start to have those feelings of self-doubt and, you know, you just, like I said, an outcast, you don't belong. So I am just living proof that you can go through some horrendous things and come out on the other side and be successful. But it is, like I said, it's hard. I mean, it's freaking hard, man. Like fighting the demons every day, and but you got to take care of yourself. And I think if you go out and you look for help, you will find it. People will give you opportunities to heal, but they'll give you opportunities to do better in life. They'll give you opportunities to do better things and bigger things, but you got to take them. You can't just listen. You can't go out and talk to somebody and ask them for help, and then they give you 15 things to do, and then you don't do it. If that's that if that's what you do, if you just that's you're going to be stuck in that victim loop of just you're just stuck in a loop, right? You ask for a little bit of help, you do one thing, you go back to your old ways, you ask for a little bit of help, and you're just stuck. And I've seen it. I mean, that's my mom and my sisters are in that loop where they're doing the wrong things. And I've tried to help them. They've come to me for help. I tried to help them. They didn't listen. And there's only so much time and energy that I have. If I was paid for it, sure. If it was my 9 to 5, I can understand pouring more love into it, but it's not my 9 to 5. I've got a family to feed. So when somebody comes to me for help, I'll give you about 2 or 3 shots. And if you're not making any effort, then I've got to move on. And you know, so that's kind of my message now.
Thank you again, Seth, for sharing your story. And I kind of wanted to transition this a little bit because there's a question I asked you before we started recording that I really wanted to record.
Yeah.
Mainly because I want your opinion on this because I think it's a very important opinion coming from you. So when it comes to male survivors, we even on our podcast, we only have a few episodes with survivors who are men, and as a society, we don't necessarily interact with them as often or hear their stories as often. And there's plenty of reasons for why that is. And there's plenty of barriers that are specific to men when it comes to reporting and talking about the abuse they've experienced. But what I wanted to ask you, Seth, is so what would you want male survivors to know? And then what do you think our society can do that would better help male survivors?
So male survivors, I would say anybody that I would talk to, I would want them to know that they need to get help. They need to let that thing go, and everybody has a giant in their life, okay? Everybody has a Goliath or a mountain, okay? And if your mountain is in front of you, and if you don't try and get around it or over it, it's just going to be there. And that's just going to be the only damn thing you see. And so everything that you do in life, you're not going to do it right because you can't see what's on the other side of the mountain, which is that guidance and that healing part of life. And I say that because if you don't get help, you will find yourself in a bad place. And I almost did multiple times. Um, I, I, when this happened to me, I was very sexually motivated, which is a pretty typical response from what I've learned and kind of read. So anytime I met a girl, I was very sexually motivated, and I always wanted to have sex right away after I had reported this guy. And I was very handsy, very touchy. I certainly never raped anybody or never did anything like that, but I could have fallen into that. I could have very well fallen into that and been a not a victim, but a perpetrator or whatever, a predator. I could have fallen into that, and luckily I was smart enough to back off when I needed to. But I was not respectful guy when it came to women, you know, and so and I was like that because I never healed. I never went through it as a young man, and so when I was 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. I just thought that this relationship was just transactional. Like I take you out to eat, then we have sex, and that's how it is. And so for men who go through this, they need to know that like that's not okay. Nobody owes you anything, right? Nobody owes you any kind of sex. Nobody owes you any kind of favor, no matter what, no matter how nice or sweet you are or what you buy them. They don't owe you anything. And if you don't try to heal from what you've gone through, you are going to suffer. And not only are you going to suffer, but your kids, your family, your children's children, and that giant or that mountain will stay in your life and it will stay in your family's life and your kids' life until somebody chops it down, until or goes around it or gets over that mountain, or if you look at it like a giant, until somebody kills that giant, it's going to stay right there in the middle of the arena, and it's just going to say like who wants it? Like come on, like who like I own this arena, right? So that's how I looked at it. That's how I look at it now. Is like I've got to get out in the arena, and all these people are standing around the Coliseum, right? And they're all looking at me like, oh, he's gay, or we don't care, or your story doesn't matter. Like people are going to chirp, and that's fine because they don't want to make the walk. The people who are going to sit around and say, oh, you should have done this, you should have done that. Well, it's like, look, you get your ass in here and fight then. If that's what you got to say, then it's just like watching UFC at B-dubs. You know, you go watch the fights and the guy says, oh, he should have done this. It's like, well, what are you doing? You're sitting here drinking a beer, eating wings. Like, shut up, man. If that's how you feel, then go do it. So for me, I try not to be too abrasive about it, but it's like, look, man, if you're tired of your life sucking, if you're tired of being depressed, if you're tired of the pain that this thing has brought you, then go and fight it. Go and do the right thing. Let your guard down and talk to somebody and get some freaking help, man. I do a lot in the veterans, or I try to do a lot in the veteran space. Anyways, I'm getting more involved in that. And there's a lot of veterans who kill themselves, right, every single day. And I mean, I've I've lost a few guys in the last like year or two, and those guys just needed to reach out and get some freaking help. And people want to help, they just don't want to do it. They just don't want to reach out and get the help. So, for the man himself, I would say get some help, man. The therapy is 100% required, like it's needed. Um, and then as far as like America goes, I
Sorry,
would just say,
I don't I don't
go
want to cut
ahead.
you off. I really want to make it clear like how important that message is of telling men specifically to be willing to let their guard down. Because growing up as men, like we learn like that is you can never do not let that guard down. You have to be guarded and you cannot be vulnerable. You cannot talk about any of the shit you're experiencing because if you do, that means you're weak. But what is harder than going against the grain and talking about something that you are really struggling with and admitting that you're struggling? Like, there
Yeah,
is nothing harder that you're going to do than admit that you're struggling and you need help. And if we're trying to like be tough guys, like doing the hard thing is the tough thing. So be willing to be vulnerable and talk about what you got going on because you cannot do it on your own.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, man, there's another guy I watch and he talks about that too. Just no man is an island. No man is an island. Get a team. You know, you can go, what is it? You can go fast alone, but you can go farther together, right? So that's like another quote that kind of rings true. But to answer the second part of your question, I think that, when I was, like I told you before, I was looking for a platform to kind of tell my story and to kind of get it out. And it's crazy, man, because you can look up what dress Taylor Swift was wearing 15 years ago on like Thursday night. But for me, I couldn't find like resources like readily available. Like I have to if I right now if I get on Google and I type in sexual abuse resources for men, it's hard to find. Like those things are hard to find, and it's hard to find people to talk to. It's hard to find resources. It's hard to find groups. It's hard to find something that can help me get through those things. But I can find whatever, fashion or clothes or drama or whatever right now. And any podcast, anybody who's talking about overcoming hard stories, just like I told you before we started recording, I think, everybody wants to record this guy who's a Medal of Honor recipient and has this crazy war story because it's really heroic. Well, I fully respect that. Don't get me twisted. I love those stories, but there's nothing heroic about my story. I don't get an award for having the most jacked up childhood. I don't get an award for like 2023 freaking Medal of Honor for having been abused and grown up in drugs and being raped for freaking 5 years. Like I don't get an award for that. And so that's part of what makes it hard to come out about it as a man or as a victim or whatever. But then secondly, when I reach out to somebody who's got a big following and I say, look, you've got 1 million people that follow you. 25% of them are almost guaranteed to have gone through what I've gone through. Statistically speaking, a quarter of your population has gone through what I've gone through, if not more, a third, really closer to a third probably, or more than a third. And then if you combine the violence that I went through with my mom, with the drugs and that stuff too, you're talking even more people. So I'm not saying that to say that everybody needs to let me get on their podcast, but for the people who want to get up and speak about these things, if somebody's got a story to tell, man, like these guys have got to let people speak up and then fund these organizations that are really trying to help, man. Because there's a place here in Gainesville, Georgia, that I'm speaking for in August, and they help children from 3 to 17 with the healing process. So once somebody goes through it, they take those kids in and they help them. It's all free of charge. It's a nonprofit, and they help the kids heal. And those things cost money. And if people don't know your story and don't know why these things are important, they're not going to pay. They're not going to contribute to it. So um, I speak up more for anybody else than I do for myself. It is part of my healing part, certainly. But I've had so many people reach out and been like, dude, your story is insane. And all they've listened to is my interview with the cop. They really don't know anything. My big interviews have not come out yet. So your story is important, and America and the population, we need to talk about these things and share them to your freaking IG feed or Facebook or YouTube or share it, man. Like if share it, somebody out there's looking for some freaking help, man. And I was that guy, so I listen to people tell their stories, and I think that if it's hard to understand how serious it is, but if you have kids, I think if I look at my 3-year-old son, who's a blonde hair, blue eyed boy, I said this before, and I'll say it again. I could probably sell him on the internet for $50,000, right? And then he'll get passed around the entire world and addicted to heroin or meth or whatever they want to put him on, so he can take the pain. And they'll do horrendous things to a little boy, and it's going to happen tonight. It's going to happen tomorrow night. Somebody's going to buy some little kid, or somebody's going to take some little kid in and abuse them. And these tragic, horrendous things are happening. And it's not fun to hear. It's not fun to talk about. It's not fun to think about. But I think that if it gets in the right person's ears, and the right people, get attention, then it'll help bring that awareness out, and hopefully raise more money and more opportunity to save people and heal.
Well, thank you, Seth, for joining us today. We've genuinely enjoyed having you. If there's ever anything we can do for you, please also let us know. We would be more than happy to aid you in any way we possibly can. And for those of you who are interested, in the show notes, I'll make sure I put a link to the interview that Seth did with law enforcement so that you can see that as well. So before we sign out, Seth, is there one last point you want to give to our audience?
I would just say, support the show, support the conversation, support it. And when I say that, I mean the likes, the subscriptions, sharing, comments. Those things are what generate your show to have a larger spread, gathering, things like that. So even if it's just one word saying good job or whatever, a like, comment, share, subscribe, those things help get the story out. So if you care about it, if you know Sean and Amanda personally and you want to help them, that's the easiest way to do it. A lot of people say, well, how can I help? Look, this is the easiest way to do it right here. And it's you don't have to pay a dime. You just get on there, comment, like, subscribe, share. That's it. So I appreciate you guys, for listening. And then if anybody needs anything, man, you can always reach out. I'm on Instagram. My Instagram is Go Beyond the Shadows. That is my Instagram as of right now, and that's kind of what I'm working off of.
Awesome. And I'll make sure I link that in the show notes as well, because you beat me to the question about asking about
Yeah.
any of your social media.
Yep. I have
So,
Facebook and LinkedIn as well, so all those things, but that's just my name, Seth Gehle, so anybody can reach
oh,
out.
sweet. Yep. I'll make sure I link those in the show notes and everything for our listeners as well. Well, thank you again, Seth. And thank you all for listening today. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Threads at Touchy Subspod to keep up to date when we have new episodes and content going out there. Please email us any questions, comments, or concerns to touchysubjectspodcast@gmail.com. And please rate and follow us on your favorite podcast listening app. It really does help the show out.
And in the meantime, don't be afraid to challenge, ask, and discuss when it comes to touchy subjects.